Hello, my name is Timothy, and today I will be talking about how euthanasia does not help the terminally ill. First off, I'd like to ask, who would want to die? Probably no one. But when someone wants to die, there must be a very intensive reason in choosing death over life. When a person has a terminally illness, euthanasia becomes an option that most people believe is a way to end a life without pain and suffering. The argument of whether euthanasia helps them or in their fight or not. I believe it is not helpful because it is pretty much legal murder. It also slows down the research that doctors can do on these illnesses for future patients. And when the patient is ill, they also make rash decisions and they're not really in self-control. Okay, my first reason is that people who are terminally ill, if a person is like terminally ill and they don't consent to die, and you decide to use euthanasia on them, that's pretty much legal murder. Like for example, a family with an ill person that is unable to make their own decisions whether they would like to end their life or not, they're pretty much like burdening the family financially or physically, and the family wants to use it on them to relieve the burden, then that's pretty much murder. They argue that there's a slippery slope between euthanasia and murder, and that legalizing euthanasia will unfairly target the poor and disabled and create incentives for insurance companies to terminate lives in order to save money, as stated in procon.org. My second reason that doctors want to prolong the life of terminally ill patients to research a possible cure for future patients with these illnesses. Opponents of the euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide contend that doctors have a moral responsibility to keep their patients alive, as reflected by the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath says that I will prevent disease whenever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. And my third reason is that the patient is not in self-control if they decide to end their life. Giving up the fight against the illness is not self-control. In the case of Brittany Mayer, she decided to take her life before the illness completely took over her. In the perspective of the patient, taking her life may be the only way of ending her suffering with dignity. The illness is psychologically affecting her decision because she may have believed that there is no hope for cure. However, medical doctor Bill Toffler says that in many cases, death lingers for hours. It's not dignified death. It's not pretty to watch somebody struggle with breathing or having irregular, shallow breathing for hours and hours on end. And there are also constant researches for finding these cures. So if you end the life early, it just reduces the chances of finding this cure if there's just that little possibility. In conclusion, I've mentioned about how euthanasia is a form of murder, how it slows down research done on the illnesses, and how patients' decisions are not in self-control dealing with their illnesses. This is why I believe euthanasia is not beneficial to use on terminally ill patients. Thank you.
Where did this guy go?
All right, Timothy, you identify the subject you're responding to, and you have an okay introduction, but there's no reference to the claim that you were responding to at all. In other words, I don't know what arguments the advocate presented in favor of euthanasia, And you basically are presenting counterclaims to the concept of euthanasia, not counterclaims to the argument made by the advocate. Which, when we talk about this, these are like rebuttal issues. When we talk about the difference between refutation and rebuttal, these are all rebuttal issues that you've got. They don't talk about the grounds in the warrant that the advocate used. They give some other reason to reject this idea. So they're not automatically illegitimate, but they definitely are disconnected from the argument that we've heard. And so there's not really any confrontation with whether or not these apply. And because you've got them kind of compartmentalized and separated, you don't make any application to the issues that they talk about. I think there are one or two points that you've got here that would apply to the argument that the advocate presented, but you don't make that application. As a listener, I would have to make that application, and that's not, you don't want us, well, let me figure out what the argument is. You want to tell us what the argument is. You want to direct us so that we are putting together information the way you think it should fit on those particular points. Organizationally, I mean, it's easy to follow. You've got a pretty clear structure. On the first point, you rely on a hypothetical example with the family that might want to get rid of a family member who's a financial burden. So there's a question then here about, well, what is the context for euthanasia? Are we talking about something that other people can choose for somebody else? I don't know that that's what the advocate talked about, because if they talked about only patients being able to choose for themselves, then that's a different issue. And so you're equivocating as if they are the same thing, and it's not the same thing. Because you don't make a reference to the advocate's argument here, we can't really make that comparison. The slippery slope argument about how this could lead us to making those kinds of decisions, I think that might be applicable here, but you have to develop a little bit more what it is that's going on there. I'm going to mention this on a couple of sites because people are going to go to these things when we get going on the debates. They're going to go to sites like procon.org or Debatepedia or something like that. And I don't mind you're going to places like that to kind of get background on the subject, but they are just presenting ideas. It's not research for the most part that's on those sites. And so you don't want to be quoting that as a source. If they've got, it's like Wikipedia. If there is a source that they cite, go there and find that information. But otherwise, they're simply kind of doing the same thing that you and I might do when we're looking at an argument. They're brainstorming about that argument. What are the possible issues? And just because they list an issue doesn't mean that they are an authority who has any proof for that issue. So you want to be very careful about citing that kind of information. The moral issue I think is fine, but when you cite the Hippocratic Oath, you cite the section that has nothing to do with euthanasia. You cite the section that has to do with preventing illness instead of treating it. And the part of the Hippocratic Oath that applies here is that I will give no harmful medicine. I will not do anything that causes death. It's like there's a very direct application to euthanasia, and you're missing the referent on that. You've got the other part. And so it was a little confusing why you were making that argument. And then the Brittany Maynard case, I don't remember if the advocate talked about that case. It seems like it would have been something that would have come up. So maybe there's a direct application to this issue. Your claim is that maybe she was influenced by her illness to feel this way rather than it really being a problem. That's a possibility. And then the evidence that you present here sounds like it's really about somebody who has chosen euthanasia, they've taken their pills to die, and then we've got that slow, painful process that's going on. But that was not very clear. I think that's what the evidence is talking about, but you need to clarify that that's what the argument is. In other words, when people think they're taking the easy death out, well, a euthanasia death is not necessarily an easy one, and here's what happens. That's the way I think you need to present that argument. All right, thank you.